This is a question that many have been asking lately. Why is Israel the most persecuted country in the world? Since God created man and placed him in the Garden of Eden, there have always been attacks by Satan. There, a promise was made that from the woman would come one who would crush the head of the serpent. Centuries later, Jesus came and defeated him, which caused greater fury against God's chosen people, the Jews. A large portion of the world's population is not favorable to Israel, but they cannot explain why they have this lack of affinity and disrespect. These same people should ask themselves, why do I have this feeling against a nation that has never harmed me or my country? By conducting this internal analysis, one will get to the root of the problem. It is something spiritual, not a normal human feeling. Let's understand chronologically, as described in the Holy Bible, the many attacks by Satan to wipe the nation chosen by God off the world map. The narrative about Israel and its adversities begins right at the dawn of biblical history, involving not just earthly conflicts but also spiritual battles that have shaped the destiny of this nation. Over the centuries, the persecution of Israel can be seen both physically and spiritually, with roots that go deep into the book of Genesis. Let's start with the Tower of Babel, an episode that, although it does not mention Israel directly because its formation as a nation would come much later, establishes a pattern of rebellion against God which, in turn, directly impacts the people chosen by God. After the flood, humanity, led by Nimrod, a mighty hunter, and according to tradition, a rebellious ruler, began to build a tower that would reach unto heaven. This project at Babel was not just an architectural feat, it was a symbol of defiance against divine authority, an attempt to unify humanity under a single ruler and system, opposing the divine mandate to fill the earth. This event is crucial because it shows a coordinated human effort to establish an order that opposes God's plan. The divine response was to confuse the languages, scattering the peoples. This dispersal is key to understanding the later emergence of Israel. God would call Abraham from Ur of the Chaldees, a region influenced by the events at Babel, promising to make him a great nation that would stand in contrast to the rebellious kingdoms of the earth, such as the one Nimrod tried to establish. Moving forward in history, the descendants of Adam, Noah, Abraham, and Jacob were enslaved for 400 years in Egypt. The formation of Israel as a nation under Moses and the subsequent entry into the Promised Land introduce a series of confrontations that can be seen as Satan's attempts to prevent the establishment and prosperity of Israel, the nation that carried the Messianic promise. Continuing the chronology, the Philistines emerge as one of the most recurrent adversaries of Israel, especially during the period of the Judges and the early monarchy. This people, often in conflict with the Israelites, were not just a military rival but a symbol of constant resistance to the aspirations and survival of Israel in the Promised Land. During the time of the Judges, the Philistine presence is a constant source of pressure and provocation. The Philistines, one of the 5 major city-states along the Mediterranean coast, were known for their military strength and advanced culture in terms of iron production. This technological superiority gave the Philistines a significant advantage in conflicts, which often placed the Israelites in a position of disadvantage and subjugation. The books of Judges and Samuel describe a series of confrontations where the Israelites struggled to free themselves from Philistine dominance. The story of Gideon and his 300 men is one of the most fascinating and inspiring in the Old Testament, found in the book of Judges, chapters 6 to 8. This narrative not only challenges conventional logic of war, but also highlights themes of faith, obedience, and divine intervention in extraordinary ways. Gideon, a man of modest origin from the tribe of Manasseh, is called by God at a time of great crisis for Israel. The people of Israel were being oppressed by the Midianites, a powerful nomadic nation that regularly invaded Israeli lands, destroying crops and leaving the population in severe poverty and despair. The situation seemed hopeless, and it is in this setting that God chooses Gideon to be the liberator of Israel. Surprisingly, even with a large number of volunteers ready for battle, God instructs Gideon to drastically reduce his forces to just 300 men. Gideon and his men achieve a complete and overwhelming victory against a numerically superior army. The narrative culminates dramatically and symbolically in the story of David and Goliath, described in detail in the first book of Samuel, chapter 17. Here, the conflict between Israel and the Philistines is encapsulated in the confrontation between 2 individuals: David, a young shepherd and future king of Israel, and Goliath, a Philistine warrior of immense stature and strength, whose presence on the battlefield was enough to terrify the Israeli army. Goliath challenged the Israelites daily, taunting them and mocking their inability to face him. This challenge was not just a duel between two warriors, it was an affront to the God of Israel, a provocation that questioned the faith and courage of the chosen people. David's victory over Goliath becomes a turning point, reaffirming God's sovereignty over Israel and its enemies, and solidifying David's leadership and reputation among his people. These stories of confrontations with the Philistines do not merely recount episodes of military conflict, they reflect an ongoing struggle for Israel's identity and survival in a hostile region. Each confrontation, each battle, carries layers of spiritual and national significance, highlighting Israel's resistance not only against earthly adversaries but against forces seeking to challenge its divine destiny. After the death of Solomon, the kingdom of Israel splits into two: Israel to the north and Judah to the south. Both kingdoms face various external threats and sometimes fight among themselves. A clear assault by Satan with the premise of divide and conquer. The episode of the Assyrian conquest of the Kingdom of Israel is one of the most dramatic and defining moments in biblical history, narrated in detail in 2 Kings 17, verses 1-6. This event not only marks the end of Israel's political existence as an independent kingdom, but also serves as a testament to the consequences of disobedience and infidelity to the covenant with God. The text describes how Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, invades the Kingdom of Israel during the reign of Hoshea. Initially, he tries to rebel against Assyrian domination by seeking help from Egypt. This action, perceived as a betrayal by Shalmaneser, precipitates a brutal siege of the capital Samaria, which lasts 3 years. The city eventually falls in the year 722 BC, and the result is devastating. The Israelites are taken captive to Assyria, dispersed among other conquered populations, thus diluting their national and religious identity. This event is treated in the scriptures not just as a political consequence, but as divine judgment on Israel's infidelity, which had strayed from God's ways, worshiping other gods and ignoring divine commandments and warnings. In contrast to this scenario of conquest and exile, we have the inspiring story of Elisha and his confrontation with the Assyrian armies, an episode that vividly illustrates divine power and protection. This narrative is found in 2 Kings 6, where Elisha is in Dothan, surrounded by Assyrian troops sent to capture him because he was thwarting Assyria's military plans by informing the king of Israel about the enemy army's movements. At dawn, Elisha's servant sees the city surrounded by Assyrian horses and chariots, and taken by panic, questions what they can do. It is then that Elisha demonstrates his faith and trust in God, praying for his servant's eyes to be opened. When his prayers are answered, the servant sees the hills around Dothan filled with horses and chariots of fire, a heavenly army far more powerful than the Assyrian forces. Elisha then prays for God to blind the Assyrians, and he leads them to Samaria, where they are surrounded by the Israelites. Instead of ordering their execution, Elisha instructs the king of Israel to feed and release the Assyrian soldiers, an action that temporarily leads to the cessation of Assyrian attacks against Israel. Now we have the southern kingdom, Judah, being invaded by Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. Jerusalem is destroyed and Solomon's temple is razed. The Jewish people are taken into Babylonian exile, where they remain for 70 years. The Persians, led by King Cyrus the Great, conquer Babylon in 539 BC and allow the Jewish exiles to return to their homeland and rebuild the temple. This marked the beginning of the Second Temple period. The Greeks, led by Alexander the Great, conquered the Persian Empire in 333 BC, including the land of Israel. After Alexander's death, his empire was divided among his generals, and the land of Israel came under the control of the Seleucid Empire. Pompey the Great invaded Judea and incorporated the region into the Roman Empire. This rule was marked by several rebellions, including the Great Jewish Revolt between 66 and 73 AD and the Bar Kokhba Revolt between 132 and 132 and 136 AD. There have been numerous other invasions and assaults against the people of Israel. The idea of kings throughout history in the Old Testament was not just to conquer; the objective was to eliminate them from the planet, unlike other nations which were merely to be conquered. The devil has tried and continues to try to destroy this nation at any cost. Because he knows that he has little time left, the devil has come down to you, and he is filled with fury, because he knows that his time is short. Revelation 12, verse 12. This pattern of persecution is not limited to the Old Testament. Throughout the Jewish diaspora, following the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 AD, Israel continued to face hardships and manifestations of persistent spiritual resistance against the existence and identity of Israel. Each episode of persecution is seen by some as part of an ongoing struggle between spiritual forces aiming to prevent Israel from fulfilling its biblically prophesied role. Thus, when discussing the persecution of Israel through the centuries, we are not merely discussing historical events, we are delving into a worldview that sees the history of Israel as a battleground between divine and malevolent forces, where each conflict, each adversity, and each triumph is a chapter of a long spiritual narrative deeply intertwined with the fate of humanity as a whole. This view emphasizes not only the resilience of Israel, but also its central role in a cosmic drama that continues to unfold today.